breaking down everyday workplace issues and diagnosing the hidden sickness, not just the obvious symptom. Our hosts, James and Kobe.
Did we lose a patient?
No, that's just my lunch.
Hey, thanks for joining us. I'm Kobe, he's James. So let's get started with a question. Current people and culture strategies. How do we get here?
I think a big part of our progression to what's happening now, a lot of it has to do with the books that we read and the gurus that we listen to. So, for example, over Christmas, I had an opportunity to finally get caught up on some of the books that I had been wanting to read for a while. I don't think a podcast has gone by without me referencing how much time I spend on Reddit. So once again, thank you, Reddit. Frequently on entrepreneurial forums or subreddits, there's questions about, what are the books that I should be reading? What do I need to know to start my business, to structure my business, to do all of these things? And there are some great books out there to help you with business structure. So, watching these posts come up over and over again, there were a few books that always seemed to be recommended. So I ended up picking up the audio versions of them so that I could just be lazy and listen to them rather than physically have to hold something, which is so much effort. Anyways, there's a lot of good stuff in there. All right. If I've talked before about, how I used to do business coaching, and a lot of these books probably I should have read years ago when I was doing business coaching, because they would have been helpful in how I approach some of the work with clients. The problem, and this is why I wanted to talk about this topic. The problem is that they offer great advice on structure, great advice on starting, great advice on organizing. And then when you get to anything related to HR or people and culture, it's a dumpster fire. It's a slight exaggeration. It's ineffective at best and potential and damaging, especially in the long term at worst. And the reason why I say that is because the examples that really spring to mind is that some of the good advice around getting your thoughts out and organizing pieces were around identifying, early on, identifying company values, identifying what it is that you're trying to achieve, and aligning your structure to those goals, which helps you have a clear path forward, a clear endpoint, and a goal to work towards. However, they took the books that I read took much the same approach with their approach to how do you engage with people? How do you bring your people along with you? And what I fundamentally disagree with are the ideas that a small group sets the values. Those values are somehow automatically your culture. And then we're going to have our managers create a completely subjective measurement on how well the people they manage meet those values. And then if they don't hit our completely subjective benchmark on the completely subjective measurements, then we're going to fire them. Right. It's this idea of that you have to find the perfect person, that it's uncovering who's going to be the best person for your organization and bringing them along with you, rather than putting any effort into developing the skills and abilities of people who are already working with you.
Yeah, so it's funny because when you kind of came in, like kind of after the break, you're like, so I read all this stuff and you'll never kind of guess what kind of what I figured out. and then you showed some, you played some of the audio for me, and you were laughing at the faces that I was making as I was listening to this
I also
terrible
just laugh
advice.
at your
Or
face.
yeah, maybe it's a bit of column A, a bit of column B. But so there is, again, the stuff around, like, here's this very technical tool that will let you kind of analyze the people in your workplace, and it's more like the person just puts their opinion about it and then holds them to that opinion, and we're like, that's not any kind of tangible measurement. That's a just you're trying to validate your opinion, and you're assuming that that is the same as clear, measurable data. And I think a lot of that kind of comes from, because, like, the other thing too, you said that, and I'm like, well, maybe you just kind of got some of these books. And again, what's funny is these were like multi-million-dollar selling books. These are the books that the person listening to this, if you've read books, these management advice books, likely you've read some of these. And then we looked at some other ones, and we kind of kept finding the same trends. And I was like, is this the generally accepted advice that's highlighted in these guru books and programs? Because a lot of this stuff was, I suppose, kind of made sense like 20 years ago, or 20, like in the 90s. This might have been what could have worked in that
90s
environment.
wasn't 20 years ago anymore.
That's true. Yeah. Well,
crap.
right. Wow, I am old. But yeah, so 30 years ago or something, this would have been, that it might have been understood or accepted. But in a post 2020 world, after the world changed with COVID, this stuff is, like you said, it's potentially dangerous now. If this is still the playbook that most businesses are using to manage people and culture. And again, advice,
that's a really important piece to jump on. And I know I interrupted you, but I want to emphasize that it's not that the books are terrible or that they are offering you bad advice, because in the context of when they were written, it probably wasn't far off the mark of popular thinking, right? But we have seen so much change since the onset of COVID, from the way that people choose to engage in work to the expectations that they have around work, that listening to those best-selling gurus, talk about people and culture and just so fundamentally get it wrong for where we are now. Really, that's what struck a chord with me, because there is great material in these books. And if you want to learn about business structure, there are some great resources out there.
Absolutely. And if you're, trying to gain momentum, or if you're trying to gain traction in your workplace and in your business, and then, then some of the stuff can be very helpful. But when you get to the people and culture side of it, it's potentially damaging, because this advice from the past is kind of where most of the problems that we have today are coming from, because this antiquated stuff that made sense, it was popular opinion a long time ago, is not going to be what will create success today. And sticking to it or following through with it is going to be what puts a lot of businesses at risk. And essentially it is kind of where we are today. Kind of going back to the question we asked at the beginning, the people and culture, the environment that we have, largely were shaped by these books, and this guru advice. Because like we said, millions and millions and millions of people have read this stuff and assumingly have applied it. So this is largely kind of,
well, and it's not only the books. Entire consulting industries have developed around these books. And so it's not just people reading the books and implementing it themselves. There are some fantastic people working in this area of providing business coaching, business services, business consulting, helping with the structure and the organization and the process side of things, that has really good tools in that regard. but they're using the advice from this people and culture piece that is it's not going to accomplish what you want it to accomplish. If you see any success, then it's as much luck as intent. And it's probably costing you far more than it should to do basic to shore up your recruitment and retention strategies. And this is what bothers me. It's not a malicious thing by any stretch, right? Nobody has set out to do this wrong. It's just these are the tools that have been popularized and that have been taught, but they have an incomplete picture.
Yeah, I would say they're definitely written and presented and created with very, very good intentions.
Yeah,
and with the best thought put into it, but it's easily either A, misinterpreted, or B, or really it's incomplete, and it and misses the mark. And so, like, because again, we had a gentleman who's become a close business partner of ours, who works with a lot of companies doing a lot of coaching and using a lot of these existing programs like built around this kind of stuff, like you said. And he said to us, well, the problem that I keep running into is all the stuff around the structure and everything else is so great, but the people and culture side is so weak that that we need to find better solutions. And so it's great, though, that the industry is starting to realize this stuff is not working. So it's not just us saying it; it is what
it's the professionals who are using these tools who are trying to help clients. A lot of them work with small businesses, and the gentleman who you like, very passionate, very committed, very value driven to provide excellent resources and supports to his clients.
Yeah. So shout out to Mark. Good job, Mark.
Yeah. And I'm sure that the Others who work in the same space as him are just as dedicated, right?
Absolutely.
The problem is you can only use the tools that you've been given.
Yeah.
Right. And unfortunately, in this very important area of people and culture, the tool is weak. Yeah. Every other spot in terms of the business structure and processing and organization, I was going through, I was listening to the books, and I was going, no, that's actually a really good way to articulate it. Damn, I wish I had thought of that 10 years ago when I was trying to do this. Right. Man, every time there was a reference to people and culture, it's just, it felt like nails on a chalkboard as I'm wincing listening to the recommendations.
Yeah. Well, and again, let's give a little bit of perspective here too, is that we are people and culture experts. Like sometimes we mistakenly say, we do employee engagement, or we do, workplace culture focus, but really, or we do workforce stuff. But honestly, though we may slip up and misstate it at times, we are about people and culture. So this is an area that we live and breathe every day, that we do training and certification and coaching and consulting and all the other kind of stuff on. So it's kind of like this is our bag. So when we see this, we don't, it's not that they're not doing it the way we would do it. It's that the advice is not going to be effective. So I think that what we should do, I think we set the stage about why we're talking about this, maybe a little more than we needed to.
I'll move on.
Yeah. I think we should talk about what are the fundamental mistakes that it's providing, so the person listening can actually, realize, okay, maybe if I am following this, where am I going wrong, and where can I go right?
So I'm going to steal your analogy because I thought it was well stated when we had this conversation.
He usually does do that.
Yeah, I do that. So essentially, where I kind of alluded to it earlier, where a lot of the advice seems to flow towards is the idea of uncovering the right person, discovering the right person, identifying that person. So the analogy that you used, Kobe, that I thought was really apt is it's the idea of mining for potential. right? Mining is a finite activity. Eventually, the mine is going to run out of precious gems, and you'll have to find another solution, right? This idea of uncovering the precious gem, and then all you have to do is just polish it a little bit and put it into the right place, and it'll sparkle. Right. That is a short-term solution. And that's where the advice really tends to focus on is how do you identify, well, that's one of the problems. How do you identify those people and put them into the right person in the right position, which that statement I agree with. The other big problem that I have with the way the advice around people and culture was given is that, first of all, please don't confuse your values with your culture. Just because you as an organization or as a leadership team have created a mission statement or a value statement or have identified what your core values are, that does not automatically create culture. And so the way that the advice I'm kind of blending the different books that I've read, but generally the way that the advice is presented in these different resources is that if you, what you want to do is find people who fit in with your culture. And that seems like a pretty benign statement, or even it seems like a pretty reasonable statement to make, because yes, you want people who share the same values that you do. You want people who will fit in with your culture. That's the language that is used. The problem with that statement is that it's not an inclusive statement, right? It's not about finding people who will fit in. It's not about finding people who you can bring in and have them assimilate to the same way of doing things, because all that does is it creates this dull gray, just bland environment where everybody thinks the same, acts the same, says the same things. There's no room for diversity of thought or opinion or perspective, which is incredibly important and very, very valuable in everything that you do. If you can actually create a culture that values and seeks out diversity of opinion, that's huge. And so this is part of the problem that I have with the language that is used, because it sounds good and it sounds reasonable, but it actually takes you down a path that I feel is unhealthy, that I feel we have actually gone down that path as a society of workplaces, of expecting to find the perfect person who's going to fit in with our culture, versus the other part of the analogy that I'm continuing to steal from Kobe, is the idea of, rather than mining, farming, right? So in a farming activity, you are intentionally creating the conditions, the soil, the fertilizer, you're planting a seed in the right conditions, and you are taking steps to nurture that seed. That is a sustainable talent process of you still need to identify the right kind of people who will work with your organization, but focus on values, not forcing people to conform to what you already believe. Seeking out diversity in thought and perspective is huge. Allowing people to be their authentic self is incredibly important in creating inclusion and belonging, and like we've talked about our hierarchy many times, and we'll keep going back to that because it is core fundamental theory for how workplace cultures are built. This idea of you need to develop your talent, because identification is not enough to retain people. There are so many companies who are looking for that right person. There are so many direct and indirect competitors who are all struggling with talent attraction and retention. That if what you are offering is a workplace where everybody looks the same, feels the same, thinks the same, acts the same, says the same things, that's not a way to attract and retain talent.
Yeah, and a lot of it is that this is kind of, if you boil down the mistakes in the advice, fundamentally, it's that they're prioritizing the wrong things, and the things that they do get right, that they do state, are they're usually not bang on, usually kind of roughly in the ballpark, or they're barely scratching the surface. Or they kind of start on the right path and then go in the wrong direction. Because you're right, it values, or it advises a very mining approach to how we attract, retain, and motivate talent. Because it's about finding people, it's about placing them in a position, and it's about making sure that they assimilate, and that they fall in lockstep, because your subjective opinion about what success looks like is the empirical data that you need to verify that you have a good employee. And that is largely what it all kind of boils down to. And that's kind of why we see, workplaces that are creating integration instead of inclusion, because they've identified a person that looks the way they want them to look, meets the expectation of diversity, but then doesn't actually let them belong and actually fully get their opinions and their perspectives and everything. And it makes a very superficial engagement. It's why we're not spending enough time training people, why we're not developing talent, because we think we have to find them pre-made, ready to go, like insert, and then they'll work perfectly. And why we don't do enough internal promotions, because we don't create these great career ladders or career paths for people, because it's about finding the right person that will go into the position to kind of achieve to achieve the outcome. And a lot of these really fundamental mistakes that we're seeing that are causing a lot of these problems with the labor market, and what's going against and making the future of work concept so much harder to achieve, is this fundamental breakdown of trying to have this mining assimilation, fit in approach, when what we should be doing is taking the farming approach. Like you said, we need to be creating the soil. We need to be formulating the conditions, providing the support that's needed to nurture talent and give it room to grow. We need to be looking for those diverse perspectives. We need to be looking to put people in positions where they can play to their strengths. We need to be realizing that the culture is not based on the mission statement that we define as managers. The culture is actually best defined by what people who are working in the organization think the culture is. Because we can't dictate culture. Culture creates itself. And if you're not creating the conditions that will have an effective workplace culture, then you end up creating a bad culture, despite the fact that you might say it's a good culture.
Yeah, I just want to pick up on one point that you said there about we can't create culture, which is true. We can create the conditions, and that's what the hierarchy really focuses on: is what needs to exist at each stage before this will be successful. And I mean, we've just gone through a certification program on this, and that statement is like, that's at every stage of what needs to exist before we can be successful. We need to actively work on creating the conditions that create a healthy workplace culture.
Yeah. And again, this is so where we are right now is we have these workplaces that are able to consistently gain traction on core people and culture issues like recruitment and retention and productivity. And it's because we're trying to set the culture from the top and then reinforce it, instead of actually creating those conditions. And again, if we can't, because we can't address the fact that, the workplace is changing. And again, maybe this recommendation of this mining assimilation expectation may have worked, or at least may have been accepted in the 90s. It will not work now. It is not working now. This is why we're in the mess that we're in many workplaces.
Yeah, and that's the key, is that it's no, even if you've had success with that mentality in the past, it's
Mhm.
not working for the majority of businesses today.
Right.
Sorry, go ahead.
I was going to say, so I think that, I think, so the real question we need to be moving into is, what do we do now?
Hmm.
Right. So, because one of the things that, again, working with, Mark, working with the consultant we work with, like, he's like, well, we kind of have this kind of ranty kind of conversation with him over many conversations and coffees and stuff. And he's like, okay, I get it. You're right. So what do we do? And because I need to be able to kind of track and measure and build this kind of momentum in the same expectations, in the same way that these businesses are used to running. So how do we still measure and collect actual empirical data, not subjective data, on the workplace to actually to create the progression towards better recruitment and retention and productivity and performance? So it's a really the kind of the answer to that question, the short answer, is what James said. It's about the conditions of the workplace that create the culture. Yeah. If you can measure and improve the factors, the conditions, the locations, all that happens in the workplace that is affecting the culture, that is making the culture up, then that's the way that you can actually start to really see tangible, actionable steps to improve the objective measurement of people and culture.
So what's really cool is that one of the core activities that we do is we build tools. We build tools and resources. And what's nice is that we have 3 tiers of tools for each stage of our hierarchy. We've got indicator tools that will provide a kind of a snapshot, quick glance of what's going on. We've got risk assessment tools, and actually we just finished delivering a certification program over the last few days, teaching people how to use these risk assessment tools. And then we've got full-on auditing tools for each stage that will allow us to do a really in-depth analysis of what's going on. Mm-hmm. And what's exciting about this partnership with Mark is how we can take these assessment tools that we have developed and turn it into using the software solutions that are existing out there. We can measure and actually link what you do, the actions that you take on a weekly basis around your people and culture, and how that affects and influences business outcomes. Yeah. So we're really excited about this partnership.
And what's neat too is this is the kind of stuff that people are asking for. So again, we just did our workplace culture intelligence certification program with a bunch of HR professionals and senior managers, and it was really interesting because this type of tangible measurement of the factors and the locations and all the kind of stuff that influences people and culture is what everyone is ready for and wants. Yeah. Because again, going back to the books and everything, part of the problem was that the leaders' subjective opinions were seen as tangible measurements. And then one of the problems that managers have when it comes to talking to HR professionals or to their lower level managers is that they find the people and culture areas too subjective. They find it to be too feeling based, or too almost like that. We use the term kind of vapor or ether that is people and culture, because it's not great. You can't grab onto it and hold onto it, so therefore it's almost less important. So we are ready now. People want this type of of a way of gathering this information to actually find the systematic approaches to moving it, which is so awesome, because we're starting to really see how this stuff can be really helpful. Because
Absolutely.
again, demonstrating the workplace transformations that affect people intelligence can be visible, and they can be transparent, and they can be proven, and they will actually improve productivity and performance and create, that type of effect and impact that the organizations want, provided they are open to the transformation and moving away from the mining approach to the farming approach. And I kind of think that's, if there's a takeaway from this conversation, I think it's that, maybe just the analogy on its own, that we've been told to mine for talent for so long, that maybe now we need to start realizing how unsustainable that is. Because if you go back to the gold rush, it wasn't the miners that got rich, it was all of the people that sold them shovels, that sort of thing. Whereas if we move to the farming approach, that idea of nurturing and creating room to grow is going to be the more sustainable, impactful, effective way that will lead to the future of work.
And let's be real, farming is a lot of work.
Yes.
And taking a farming approach to your talent development in your organization is going to be a lot of work.
Yeah.
It will be more successful, but you really have to make sure, like, senior leadership needs to be on board, because it's not a quick fix.
No.
There are things that you can do to make quick improvements.
Yes.
But it's not a quick fix.
Right. Absolutely. No, and that is a great point, because part of it too is the long-term commitment that kind of comes from farming, because farming is something that, your soil and your success kind of grows year over year, but it still takes a long time to plant the seeds, cultivate the soil, make room to grow and nurture it, and then to kind of get to where you want to be, where it's harvest time. Whereas the cool thing about mining is you can put some work into it, then all of a sudden, boom, you hit pay dirt, and you hit that vein of shiny, and then now you're in the gold. But as great as that is not going to be a sustainable way, and almost like we've tapped the mines.
Yeah.
And that mining isn't going to work anymore. The farming approach is the approach that will actually yield the success and the results that we're looking for.
Awesome.
So I think that, yes, I think it kind of pretty much summarizes that. That's kind of the whole conversation. One thing we should, just kind of mention is that for people who are looking for kind of some resources or processes around measuring people and culture aspects,
we should probably tell them not just tell them what we've developed, but point them to it.
Yeah. If you're someone that wants to see if this is the missing piece that you're looking for in your workplace, around putting some more tangible measurements around people and culture, check out roman3.ca/PICT. Because part of what we're trying to do with this moving towards these larger pieces is around people intelligence and culture transformation. So PICT. So it's roman3.ca/PICT. So if you want to check that out, I think you might find something helpful there. But I think that kind of covers most of the conversation about going back to, how do we get here?
Yeah.
Is there anything else you want to add before I kind of jump into a summary, James?
No, I just want to reinforce that we're not saying you need to throw the baby out with the bathwater. Right. There are a lot of good recommendations. And if you are someone who's looking to answer questions of how can I structure my business in a way, how can I organize things, what are the processes that I need to go through, there are fantastic books and resources that are out there available to you. Be cautious of taking the advice around people and culture at face value.
Right. Okay. No, that's a good piece of advice. All right. So just to kind of quick summarize. So the current people and culture strategies that we use today tend to have come from a lot of the same places, a lot of gurus and books and programs that were kind of popular or accepted or at least in line with people's thinking, from 30 years ago. were often hailed as best practice. However, there's a lot of antiquated information in there, especially around people and culture, and in the way that we need to look for and look for talent and make people fit in to our workplaces. And because of how great a lot of the information in other sections of the books or in other talks by the gurus or in other programs, consulting programs are, it kind of puts credence to some bad advice around the people and culture, because it's, again, incomplete at best, but potentially damaging to your people and culture at worst, especially when you're talking long term. Because one of the mistakes that we make is we try and take a mining approach to finding talent and placing talent. And that's something that is unsustainable and is very difficult to measure and to kind of create a clear path for success to. And the other mistake that often kind of comes up is that defining culture through mission statements or through kind of higher level decisions at the top level, and then saying, this is what culture is, this is how you have to fit in, and this is the way that we are going to hold you to our subjective opinions for success. But what we need to start doing is realizing that information may have worked before, isn't going to work now, especially in a post-2020 world. We need to start thinking about people and culture through more of a farming mentality, where it's about understanding that that we need to cultivate people, we need to create the conditions that will actually allow them to grow, and that different products, different crops, different people need different things, and that it's okay to kind of look at finding or growing people and providing them what they need to blossom. And that type of strategy is going to be easier to measure, is going to be easier to sustain, and will have a greater impact. And there are ways to do that, to measure people, but the best way is not going to be to measure the culture itself, but to actually measure the conditions that create the culture, because that's going to be where the success will come from. All right. I think that's about it in our exploratory surgery on how do we get here.
Awesome.
All right. So that about does it for us. For a full archive of our podcast and access to the video versions hosted on our YouTube channel, visit roman3.ca/podcast. Thanks for joining us.
For more information on topics like these, don't forget to visit us at roman3.ca. Side effects of this podcast may include improved retention, high productivity, increased market share, employees breaking out in spontaneous dance, dry mouth, aversion to the sound of James's voice, desire to find a better podcast.